My name is Andrew Chu. I'm with the Duluth Republicans, Senate District 8. I serve on the Executive Committee. On behalf of the Executive Committee, thank you for all coming to our summer symposium today. We have as our guest speaker Representative Eric Lucero. And I'll tell you a little bit about him shortly. Who's our flag is right here. If you would all stand, please, to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have known Eric Lucero for about 8 years. This goes back to the fight over education on Common Core. We were both passionate defenders of parental rights and educational liberty. And over the years, we've had some contact through social media and so forth, but in thinking about the event tonight and about the topics that are relevant to our time in this election cycle, that being election integrity and something called ESG, I thought Eric would be a great guy to give this talk. But his biographical background is something maybe worth touching on and establish his qualifications to speak on these two issues. He's serving as currently his 8th year in the Minnesota House District 30B in eastern Wright County, and is presently running for Minnesota Senate of Senate District 30. He's particularly passionate about the Constitution, free markets, individual liberty, and preserving our great republic. Eric is chief author of numerous bills relating to medical freedom. He is pro-life, pro-Second Amendment. His concerns also include election integrity and stopping environmental social governance in Minnesota. He was a successful litigant against the current Secretary of State in an October 2020 lawsuit, which prohibited Minnesota's 7-day extension for counting absentee ballots received after Election Day. He has professional training and experience in information technology and other cybersecurity fields, going back about 2 decades. He earned an MBA from the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota, after previously achieving bachelor's levels degrees in computer forensics and science and law enforcement, with minors in mathematics and psychology at Metropolitan State University. He also has a training background in computer network design and development degree from NEI College of Technology. He served 7 years as a college instructor, teaching computer security, computer forensics, voice and data communications, and other courses. He is a small business owner of a consulting firm assisting organizations of all sizes with information security projects. Please join me in welcoming Representative Eric Lucero.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for the opportunity to join you this evening. It is, you can turn the lights down. It is an honor to be here. What a phenomenal turnout, and thank you for spending some time to come out tonight, because we're going to have several conversations, 2 topics tonight, one on ESG, the second on election integrity. Both of those are incredibly important and have a direct impact, not only on us today, but on the next generation, because we are all working very hard today in order to preserve the constitutional republic for the next generation, right? And we are in the midst of a culture war. We're seeing it all around us. All of the institutions, the very systems that allowed our country to achieve what no other country on the face of the earth has been able to achieve, through God-given rights, the recognition of liberty at the individual level, having checks and balances throughout our government, all for the purpose of allowing people equal opportunity and then to pursue happiness and self-determine the outcomes of our own lives, right? That is what makes the United States exceptional. Unique from all other countries in the world. And so, yes, we are in a culture war. And you can see from the title of the slide, I know that there's some light coming there and it's really difficult to see, but I will say everything, so if you can't say anything or need for clarification, please feel free to raise your hand in the middle of this and I can answer or bring some clarification. So what I do for a baseline, just because some of you might know who I am, some of you may have no idea who I am. As Andrew said, I've had the privilege of serving as state representative for the last 8 years in the State House. I am running for Senate this year after redistricting to continue to fight for the truth and our way of life in the Senate. But for those who don't know who I am, I have a baseline here, starting with my baseline, so that you know who's talking to you. This is what I believe. This is where I'm coming from. As I've already mentioned, our great constitutional republic is unique in human history. Recognition of God-given unalienable rights. Most other countries don't recognize that. But the basis of our of our Constitution is the recognition of God-given unalienable rights. Rights that the government can't even infringe upon because they were given to us by our Creator. Liberty flows to each individual. Why is that important? Because there are other countries that recognize rights, but that the rights belong to the group or the collective. It's unique to make the statement that rights belong to the individual. Because if rights belong to the collective or the group or society, then society can determine which rights can be taken away. Right? But when they're at the individual level, not even society, by proxy of government, has the right to infringe on those liberties. Equal opportunity regardless of background. Because of the way that our system is set up, it doesn't matter where you were born, your family lineage, your background, your educational background, maybe you have no educational background, right? Our system of government allows equal opportunity regardless of background. And that's important because our country is filled with people that started with nothing or immigrated to this country with nothing, $0 in their pocket. And they found incredible success because that's what our country allows. And then lastly, separation of powers, checks and balances, and decentralized authority are all designed and were specifically engineered by our founding fathers to protect the recognition of that truth, of individual liberty and the right to pursue happiness. Unfortunately, many of these controls right here, separation of powers, checks and balances, and decentralized authority, are under attack. There are those groups and parties and individuals working as hard as they can right now to tear down and do the opposite of these things, to not have separation of power, to violate the checks and balances, and to consolidate power, which all again becomes a threat to our liberty. So anyway, that's what I believe, that's my background. So with that, you can understand my perspective with the presentations tonight. So the first is we're going to talk about ESG. And again, I know that the sun is shining here, so that might be difficult to read, but the goal of the left. Do we have goals here, those of us here on the right? We have goals to preserve the Constitution, right? To preserve what our parents gave to us, so to preserve that and give that to the next generation, to our children. But the left also has goals. And those goals, shockingly, are not the same as ours, right? The world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions and every industry. So far, touching on every aspect of society, but it continues on, and every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed. In short, a great reset of capitalism is needed. This is from the founder and chief executive of the World Economic Forum. That is the goal of the left, to transform every aspect of society. Okay, well that's their goal. here we have Barack Obama saying almost the same thing. How many recall when he said, fundamentally transform America? That is their goal, to transform. Now, each and every one of us in here recognizes we are not perfect. There is no system of government that's perfect. There is no country or society that's perfect. We have our flaws in the past and we have our flaws in the present, right? We recognize that. And there are always opportunities and areas for improvement. From local communities, at the state level, at the national level, and private organizations, everything in between. There are always opportunities for improvement. But opportunities for improvement is much different than fundamentally transforming, right? Fundamentally transforming is not making some changes, not making some tweaks. It's turning the system on its head. And that's what the left wants to do. That's their goal, to turn our entire way of life from a free market, individual, liberty-oriented constitutional republic to a centralized control, authoritative, government makes decisions on who the haves and have-nots are going to be, what our priorities in our lives should be, socialism, communism in different forms of isms. That's fundamentally transforming. That's what they want to do. They want to replace free market capitalism with socialism, tear down our constitutional republic engineered with the express, and it's being cut off. Can't read the rest of it, but our constitutional republic was specifically engineered to protect individual liberty. And I've said that a couple times because it is so important. It's what our children and what government schools are not teaching. They are not teaching why our system, not that it's perfect, but that it's superior than other systems of government throughout the world. Even our founding fathers recognized that it's not perfect. The verbiage they use is to form a more perfect union, right? If we're right here, we'll take a step in the direction of getting us to a more perfect union. Not perfect, but getting us in that direction. But that's what our children are not being taught. The reasons for our government. So if that's the goal of the left, they have a strategy. And their strategy includes advancing radical leftist political and cultural goals by imposing requirements on businesses, individuals, and families, leveraging, so that's what they want to do, in order to accomplish that goal, or strategy, or that's the strategy, they leverage other institutions. And we're seeing that all around us. Some examples include, I keep flipping the wrong button. See, this is what happens when you get a new piece of technology and you try to use it on the fly. I got a brand new clicker, and so I'm continuing to hit the wrong button as I'm flipping through here. Get this? Leverage large corporations. Do we admit that large corporations have a disproportionate level of influence in our society?
Yes.
They do. And so with that influence, the radical left wants to harness their leverage and influence to promote their left-wing radical agenda. They want to utilize or leverage asset managers. We're going to talk about what asset managers are. If you haven't heard of them, I'm just getting over a cold, so I apologize. I'm sucking on what I have found to be the single greatest cough drop there is. Fisherman's Friend. Has anybody heard of Fisherman's Friend? It beats all others. Yeah, there we go. That was my plug for them. Banking and insurance institutions with radical leftists and corporate media. Okay, so they want to leverage several of those examples, and then to help reinforce that leverage, the help of their leftist friends in corporate media, Hollywood, and government schools providing the influence in the culture war, right? So you have this idea, leveraging radical leftist policies, and then you have Hollywood, corporate media, and government schools reinforcing those ideas over and over and over again. And when the same message is heard, it's echoed over and over and over again, bombards the population from multiple angles. You go to the movies, you hear messages there. You go to government schools, you hear similar messages there. You go to other areas of society, you're having all of these messages reinforced. Eventually, it's going to erode the value sets of people, and it's going to transform their mind. And that's what we're seeing in our young people. It's very unfortunate, but the leftists understand if you can get to people as young as possible, you can plant seeds in their mind. You can plant ideas in their mind, such as, don't look at the science, be a science denier, and ignore what your genetics say, and just, you can decide that you're a man or a woman when science says otherwise. Right? That's just one example that they're planting in the minds, which is completely false. See, I know everyone here, like myself, believes in science. Right? We reject such junk that's being taught. But nevertheless, the young people don't have the life experience that we do to have, and the same critical thinking skills that we do in order to reject such garbage that's being taught, is one example. But the leftists are using this influence to reinforce their terrible ideas. Force businesses to adopt radical leftist political and cultural causes rather than engage in free market competitive decision making, maximizing return on investment. That's the purpose of corporations, right? Corporations are a form of entity that allows people to invest and in return become a shareholder. And then the board of directors is tasked with a legal fiduciary responsibility to make decisions that result in maximizing return on investment for shareholders, right? How many understand that's the purpose of a board of directors of a corporation? You invest, they make decisions that maximize return on investment. But the leftists are seeking to change the decision making of these corporations from, instead of making market decisions, risk-reward based decisions that maximize return on investment, to instead have other objectives. So ESG defined. It was on my first screen, but the letters you couldn't see it. ESG is an acronym that stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. So it's a three-letter acronym, and looking then at each of those letters, looking at environment, or here's the definition. A method of quantifying dozens of non-financial factors of an organization to produce a score demonstrating social responsibility based on the organization's commitment to advancing radical leftist political and cultural causes. So we're familiar with like a FICO score. How many have heard of a FICO score before? A FICO score is taking various data points in your lives and quantifying those to produce a score that does what? What is a FICO score supposed to indicate?
Credit rating.
Your risk of being able to repay a loan, your credit worthiness, as I heard some people say. It's a way of trying to quantify based on other data points in your life, your past, your present, your past, such as have you filed bankruptcy in the past, have you gone into foreclosure, your present, what is your present income, how long have you been employed, are you self-employed, are you W-2 employed, right? It's taking different data points in your life and assigning weight to them, these different data points, producing a single score, 700, 756, 640, 554, right? It's taking different data points, quantifying it. So we're familiar with that process or that idea, and so ESG is doing the same thing, but it's quantifying different metrics of an organization for how much effort they're putting into leftist causes. Does that make sense? So ESG is different than measuring a company's risk, profit, financial performance based on market-driven metrics. Right, which is what most of us are used to, because that's the philosophy that's been used for decades in the decision-making process. Looking at a corporation that has a product or service they want to bring to market, studying that market, the different market segmentations within that market, and how much demand would there be for that product or service, and what would it take in order to produce that product or service. So then you take what they could command for sales minus the cost equals what? Profit. And then what is the risk of that? Because not all product or service has the same risk. It's all over the board. But they want to do away with that type of standard. So here's the different acronym. You can barely see it there at the very top. Environmental. Some examples that go into that category of environmental are climate change policies. How many are you seeing companies now take public positions on climate change policies? Whereas a decade ago, you may not have even heard of that whatsoever. Right? Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Absolutely. Greenhouse gas emissions, so the size of a company's footprint. Are you seeing companies take public positions to reduce their surface area of carbon footprint? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing them put that out there in the public?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Why are they doing that? In response to the pressure that they're getting from the radical leftists who are in this culture war wanting to leverage these companies' influence over the culture. That's why they're taking these public positions. Continuing on under the category of environmental, employee incentives for carpooling, public transportation, bicycle, commuting, etc. Right? And those things aren't bad. I'm not opposed to bicycle commuting. I'm not opposed to carpooling if you choose to want to do that. Right? I don't see anything wrong with that. But you're seeing companies actively promote this rather than promoting driving by yourself in your own vehicle. Why are they doing that? Because of pressure from leftists to change behavior. Not allowing individuals to change behavior based on the variables that you use in your life, but instead trying to incentivize you or use the force of government to coercively modify our behavior, right? Under the social category, employee compensation benefits, so such as unions. If a company has a union, they're going to get a higher credit score, or not credit score, ESG score. If a company doesn't have a union, because it's presumed if a under the far left radical philosophy, if they're not a unionized shop, then they're obviously treating their employees bad, right? And therefore, they're going to get a lower ESG score. So the first cough drop has been used up. And by the way, so I'm completely violating the first rule of public speaking, right? Not sucking on or cough drop or gum, but I have no choice in this case. I try to do the best I can.
Future Senate policy, Eric, so get used to it.
Say it again.
Future Senate for policy.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Not barbarians like the House.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly, exactly. So on the side, for those who know this, for those who have no idea about my wardrobe, this is you might say, who's that weird guy in the red jacket? Well, this is kind of reserved for some of the stuff I have.
Yes, it is.
But, and I'm not joking. So I'm running for Senate, and several senators have come up to me privately and said, Eric, you do know that we are a little more reserved in the Senate hearing. That's their very diplomatic way of saying that we don't like glitter or sequin in the Senate. Continuing under social diversity. One more I have up there if you can see it. You're seeing companies take public positions on reimbursing employees that must travel now to have abortions performed. How many are seeing that? Yep. You're seeing those headlines. Why are they doing that?
They have to.
Do you think the board of directors of these publicly traded companies has made decisions, they've studied and they've said, oh, it is going to provide us, it's going to maximize our return on investment on our product or service if we offer this? Clearly that's not the case. What they're doing is they are getting pressure from different portions of government, different agencies like the Biden administration and or radical leftists that are pressuring these companies to take public positions. That's what's happening. So you're seeing these companies make announcements that they're going to reimburse their employees, not for sending their employees to college or continuing education, things like that, but no, for the transportation costs related to an abortion. Continuing in the social category, diversity and inclusion in hiring and promotions. So in other words, the percent of employees per diversity category. So in other words, I'm one of those that firmly, and I'm 100% committed to evaluating a person based on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. How many agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the leftists don't subscribe to that philosophy. They are actively pushing to evaluate people based on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. And this is just one example. Looking at somebody based on the color of their skin or other demographics, and if there's enough diversity on the board or lack of diversity, that's going to influence their ESG score. That is the antithesis of the civil rights that have been fought for, right? And it's amazing how the Democrat Party has come full circle and is now doing the opposite of what we should be doing that's healthy for our society. But continuing on, diversity in the supply chain. Does a company, are they actively discriminating against some suppliers because the suppliers may or may not be minorities, minority-owned businesses? If a company is engaged in discrimination and is not doing business because it's not a minority-owned company, then they're going to get, how did I say that? If they are discriminating and therefore are choosing to do business only with minority-owned companies, they will then get a higher ESG score in the supply chain. Does that make sense?
No.
So there's different metrics in these different categories. Community development and corporate philanthropy. How many have seen that? How many see the headlines of these different large companies and how much they're giving to this organization or that organization, or Black Lives Matter, or when walls failed and allowed Minneapolis to burn down because of his failed leadership, or allowed our great capital to get attacked, sat on his hands when he had advance notice, and allowed the criminal thugs to vandalize our great capital and have the Christopher Columbus statue torn down, right? And then instead of put back up, it's put in a closet somewhere in storage, right? And allowing that to happen, you're seeing these companies now in the aftermath publicly declare how much they're going to give to the community, right? That is, and if they're not giving enough to these different communities, they're going to get a lower ESG score. Does anybody else have an opinion on walls failed in this room?
Do we have time?
The last one is governance, or corporate governance. The number of minorities on the board of directors and management team, lobbying efforts, and public stance on social justice issues. Are you seeing companies recently take stances on social justice issues? What are some?
Abortion.
Abortion, we already just mentioned that. Disney Corporation, right? Absolutely. Major League Baseball, if we go back a year or two, they relocated the game. So you're seeing these companies take public positions and lobbying efforts on in the political arena. Companies adhering to ESG are rewarded, while those not adhering to ESG are discriminated against. They're penalized. So ESG in action. Financial institutions and credit rating firms assign ESG scores to businesses to actively discriminate. lenders and insurers collude in a cartel-like manner to stifle competition or competitive challenges to ESG. So if you're in an industry that happens to be politically correct, you know, there's a great company in Anoka, Federal Cartridge. I know they have a different name now. I think they have a different name. Does anybody know? What is it? FMC? But they're in the firearm industry, right? They produce ammunition. I've done a walk there, a tour there, legislative tour. Phenomenal company. But if you're other types of companies in the Second Amendment or firearm industry, and let's say you're having a profitable year and you want to expand, buy a couple more machines, maybe add a few, several thousand square feet to your building, you might have to go to a bank to get a loan, right, to perform that, to expand the business. Well, right now, lenders and financial institutions are colluding together, and they're saying, oh, you're not in an industry that we will choose to do business with. We will not give you a loan. How many have seen some of these headlines come out? Not just the Second Amendment or firearms industry, but other industries as well.
Yeah.
Oil companies, yep. Timber. Harvesting, because it's, we cut down trees, you're warming the earth. By the way, I'm a huge believer in global warming. And I'm serious. The earth has warmed, and here's what I've said on the House floor a number of times. I've asked the question to Democrats, Madam Speaker, will member XYZ yield? So Representative XYZ, was the earth ever in an ice age? And they will have to admit yes. Okay, Madam Speaker, will the member yield again? Are we in an ice age now? And the member will admit no. Well, so then, okay. So if we were in an ice age and we're now not in an ice age, the question that comes, it begs the question, how many internal combustion engines, coal-fired power plants, or other human activity did it take tens of thousands or longer years ago to warm up the earth, to melt those glaciers, and get us out of the ice age to where we are today? Right? That's the question. So has the earth warmed up?
Sure.
Yes, it has. But it wasn't due to human activity. So that's the little asterisk. So global warming has occurred. You can see it. But the question is it a result of human activity? And the answer is no. Because we all know that global climate change is simply a vehicle the radical, hardcore, progressive left is using as an excuse to increase government control and regulation in our lives and dictate the choices for us in how we will live our lives. That's what it's all about. Nothing more. How did I get on that little tangent?
Good.
They do an end run around American democratic governments by bypassing constitutional protections. I said in my opening slide, checks and balances are there to protect individual liberty. The left is not content in debating policy in the appropriate places throughout the United States. And the appropriate places to debate policy is in the various legislatures, right? Because you have committee processes, you have the abilities for those that are pro and against to testify, you have the ability to change language, to improve language, to debate the merits or demerits of any proposal, right? And then once it passes the House of Representatives, it would go on to the Senate, there's a check and balance within the legislative branch, it would then have to go to the executive branch to be signed into law, there's a series of checks and balances. They're not content in using that system. Instead, they're doing an end run around that to a different mechanism, and that's the avenue that I've been discussing here. They're going to their friends in Hollywood, and they're leveraging corporations which don't have the checks and balances on our individual liberty. That's why it's a huge threat. Does that make sense? So they're forcing societal transformation outside of the policy-making capital arenas, and that is an existential threat to our freedoms and way of life. I cannot underscore that enough. The fact they're sidestepping the legitimate arenas is an existential threat to our freedoms. If you can be denied loans and discriminated against because of the color of your skin, That is a threat to our way of life. ESG and social credit scores are mechanisms to facilitate discrimination against American loving patriots, etc. So ESG is to Morningstar. How many are familiar with Morningstar? Did I say ESG? ESG score is to Morningstar rating. No, I think I have that just reversed. Huh. Okay, I have that just reversed. FICO is to Morningstar, as ESG is to social credit score. See, as I was putting the slide together, I was thinking 2 steps ahead. So what I have written up there, think just the reverse. So how many have heard of Morningstar? Morningstar is just one of many organizations out there that attempt to evaluate companies and their risk and then assign a rating. I think it's from 1 to 5. Assign a rating to that company. Is it worth jumping in to invest or not? Should you sell, etc.? Okay, so we're familiar with that. So FICO score is on an individual level, right? Whereas Morningstar is to the corporate level. So FICO is to Morningstar. You see the relationship there, individual level, corporate, as social credit scores, that would be an individual level, are to ESG. ESG is ranking or rating companies. Does that make sense? So we understand FICO score and Morningstar scores, and that helps us understand the relationship then of social credit scores, which is an individual level. It's taking different data points in your life, similar to what a FICO score does, and then evaluating quantifying and producing a metric on you as an individual, on different factors in your life. And that is happening. Social credit score is in active use right now in communist China. How many are aware of that? Yep. And that's, if you want to have a higher individual social credit score grants you or affords you greater privileges in society. If you have a lower social credit score, you're discriminated against. So how do you get a higher social credit score? You conform your way of life to what the government has sanctioned is the ideal. If you're a Christian in China, what do you think that happens to you? You are certainly threatened, right? It goes on and on. The left is trying to bring those here to America. Morningstar rating for funds is a backward-looking quantitative measure of a fund's past performance measured from 1 to 5 stars. Okay, so here are some investment firms. How many have heard of Vanguard? BlackRock?
Yeah.
State Street. So just 3 of some of the big ones. So Vanguard, about $7 trillion in global assets under management as of January 2021. Is $7 trillion a lot of money? So those assets that are under their control, that's the 401ks, the pension plans, the retirement accounts of individuals across the country and the globe. Do you understand where those funds come from? Individual. If you work for an employer and that employer has an employer match to a retirement fund, maybe for every 3% that you contribute, they're matching your 3% with 3%, so you're investing a total of 6%. Well, that 6% of your salary is going into a 401k or some other variation of retirement account, and those dollars are being held where? By an asset manager. And there are asset manager firms like Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. Okay, so their cumulative total then is $7 trillion. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager with about $10 trillion in global assets as of January 2022. Okay? State Street, a global financial services and bank holding company with about $4 trillion global assets under management. So you may have your retirement funds in one of these organizations, let's say Vanguard, so they have $7 trillion. They then are they are giving you decisions. So your employer matching, which I just gave an example of, your employer might give you 6 options, 6 different funds, maybe 10 different funds to pick from. How many are familiar with this process? So you have those options and you can pick. But you did not pick which individual companies or stock are within each of these different buckets that you have to choose from, right? You get to pick at a very high level. It might be called Retirement 2040, right? Or whatever it is. It could be large cap, small cap, whatever. There's a mixture of funds within here. It could be thousands of companies or hundreds of companies within each of these buckets. The asset managers are making decisions on which funds are going to be invested in. So if they have $7 trillion, in Vanguard's example, $7 trillion in assets, and they come to Target Corporation or Disney Corporation or any other publicly traded company, and they say, we want you to hire more women on your board or more minorities on your board, or we want you to take public lobbying positions on transgender. Or, with our assets, we're going to divest our assets of your company and move them over here to a company that's more receptive to what we want them to do. Do you think the board of directors is going to listen? Absolutely it is. Because if you've got organizations like Vanguard selling funds from publicly traded companies, what is that going to do? How is that going to look from those on the outside? It's going to begin to lower stock value. Especially if you have the big firms like this making those decisions. The point is, with that level of assets under their control, they have influence over these companies. Does that make sense? So the battle has already begun. Together, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are the largest shareholders in over 90% of the S&P 500. Do you think that gives them influence? Absolutely. The average combined stake in the S&P 500 companies went from 5.2% in 1998 to 20.2% in 2021. So they look at their combined stake. Cast an average combined vote share of 25% in the S&P director elections. Okay, so back to my example. You're working for a company, you're taking 3%, your employer's matching with 3% for a total of 6%. That's going into a fund that's managed by one of these asset managers, and then your funds are purchasing shares of stock. What does a share of stock in a publicly traded company do for you? If you have a share of stock, what does that do for you? You have a vote. It gives you a voting share. Now, if you have one stock and there are hundreds of thousands of stocks in that company, right? Hundreds of thousands of shares. If you have one share, you're not, now, albeit it's very, very tiny, you still have a vote, right? Now, who are you voting for? You have a vote for what? As a shareholder, what are you voting for?
Directors.
The board of directors, exactly. You're voting for the board of directors of a company as a shareholder. Because the shareholders of a publicly traded company are the owners of the company, right? The owners of the company collectively have a vote for the board of directors. And the board of directors could be 5, 7, 10, 14, whatever. And with that board of directors in place, what do? They hire who?
Management.
The chief executive officer. The board of directors hires the CEO. And the CEO then, in turn, hires who? The rest of the C-level of that organization. Chief financial officer, chief operations officer, chief marketing officer, etc., chief accounting, etc. Okay? And so the board, so the shareholders hire the board hires the CEO hires his C-level team, then the C-level team within each of those organizations, let's say marketing, will hire their marketing VP, maybe the VP hires a series of directors, managers on down. Does that make sense? So your vote, when you're invested in this share, you're giving your money to Vanguard or State Street or BlackRock, you have a share. But how many in here have ever voted? I only see one hand. Well, your retirement funds invested in publicly traded companies afford you a vote. But because you're not the one voting, that vote has to go to somebody. Who do you think is casting that vote? The asset manager. The asset manager is voting by proxy for you. So they're voting, and you have no idea who they're voting for the boards of directors, right? Do you think that State Street, BlackRock are voting in your best interest? Do you think they share the same worldview and value set you do? Not when they're coming out trying to pressure companies to take public positions on abortion, transportation costs, and transgender policies, et cetera, right? Let me skip through here just because I don't want to run out of time for the second presentation. So the state of Minnesota, how many have heard of the Board of Investment? The SBI. I saw one hand here. So the SBI, we have a lot of government employees here in Minnesota, do we not? And those government employees have retirement accounts, pensions. So the firefighters, the teachers, the police officers, and many other government employees have pensions. And those pension funds are managed by the State Board of Investment, right? It's the similar concept to the asset manager of BlackRock I was just saying. So those retirement funds have to be managed by somebody. And in the state of Minnesota, those retirement funds are managed by the State Board of Investors. I know you can't read it, but it says right here, this is their homepage, by the way. I took this screenshot about 6 weeks ago from their website. And on the website it said, established in 1885 to manage the assets of the state of Minnesota, the SBI is also responsible for the assets of 3 statewide retirement systems, various defined contribution plans and non-retirement accounts, and tax advantage savings plans. Right, this is their homepage, okay? Look what else is on their homepage. Assets under management, fire relief associations, those sound good, right? I want to learn more. Oh, what's the third one? ESG and stewardship. Why do you think the State Board of Investment has ESG right on their homepage? Might that be an indication they have subscribed the ESG philosophy? Sure it does, but that would certainly be an indicator. Oh shoot, you can't read that, but see this arrow right here, it's getting too fuzzy for me at the bottom. What that says at the very bottom there, on March 31st, 2022, the market value of all assets by the SBI in the state of Minnesota here, $131.4 billion. Is that a lot? So that's the assets under their management. And I've already mentioned the ESG right there. So I'm going to click the About Us button at the very top there. See that? So just from the homepage, I'm just going to click the About Us. Let's see where that takes us. Well, it says right here, the board purpose, the primary responsibility of the board is to, I can't even read it, it's so small here, monitor and evaluate the investment programs as a fiduciary of the goal of making sound investment decisions. Okay, that sounds good. So in other words, they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sound decisions for $131 billion in assets under their control. Does that make sense? So far, so good. Well, look who controls the SBI, or look who is on the SBI. It's the 4 constitutional officers. So it's Governor Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, Secretary of State Steve Simon, and State Auditor Julie Blaha. The SBI is made up of 4 individuals. Do you think, so how many in here believe you have a worldview and value set that is shared by these 4? One person. Most of us in here have a worldview that doesn't agree with these people. But these people are making decisions and investments with 131 billion in assets. So if you remember on the home page, right, there was the ESG link right there. So if you click that, you get to this. We don't have time to read all this, but you can see the background right here. They've got some more information on what they've done, and they have actually passed 2 resolutions. So the current makeup of the SBI has been in place for at least 4 years, right? Because Governor Walz has been there for 4 years. And you can see there are 2 resolutions that they passed. And one of the resolutions is on ESG initiatives, and the other is in regards to investments associated with thermal coal production. Do you think that Governor Walz is in favor of harnessing the natural resources here in Minnesota and allowing mining to occur and great high-paying jobs to be created?
Absolutely not.
No, he's not. Absolutely. That's correct. He's not in favor of that. So therefore, do you think that he's using his influence on the SBI to steer that $131 billion away from mining-related companies? Absolutely he is.
How did they get away with that if they're a producer?
That's a great question. How do they get away with that if they're a fiduciary? Yeah. One would argue that acting and making decisions in that manner is the opposite or is a violation of fiduciary responsibility. Absolutely. Absolutely.
They have to look at all aspects, don't they?
Say it again.
They would have to look at all aspects.
You would think so. But the left is counting on moving the ball as far down the field as they can before people find out. And they do this for multiple areas, not just this. Right? They try and do things as fast as possible, relying on their partners, as I mentioned before, government, schools, Hollywood, and corporate media, to distract while we're all over here focused on this and talking about this stupid thing that has no relevance to the future of our republic. These radical, hardcore leftists are over here doing this, which actually infringes and erodes the constitutional protections that have allowed us to become the greatest country in the world. Okay, that's what they're counting on. Distraction and bullying. It's no longer acceptable to have policy debates, as I mentioned before, in the state capitals. They've expanded the idea, and they are the ones that have brought it to the forefront to go after people's livelihoods. Not to have the debate in the Capitol, but now let's go because they don't think politically correct, or they made a contribution to the politically incorrect organization. They're fair game to attack their livelihood and go after them and get them fired, or it's fair game to go to their neighborhood and protest on their front lawn. Right? They're bullies.
Threaten people.
And they threaten people's livelihoods. Okay, you can't see it here. This is one of the resolutions, and there isn't time to read, but these resolutions say they vote on these in 2020. They are actively taking steps with that $131 billion to steer the money in ESG favorable areas. The second resolution, it's right on the website. You go to the home page, you click on the ESG, the lower right-hand corner. I showed you where those 2 PDF links are. You can see these resolutions. And right here, they're taking the $131 billion and they are moving it away from and not allowing in the mining or fossil fuel industries. It's right there. Do you think that in an election year, those on the Iron Range or like where we are right now, northern Minnesota, would want to know that Governor Walz is actively hostile and has made decisions steering investment away from the good paying jobs up here? People would want to know that and should know that. Is corporate media doing their job? No, they're not. Is government schools doing their job to educate people in the population?
No.
No. No, they're indoctrinating, like I said, they're teaching our young children, planting seeds in their mind that are poisonous, that you can defy science and pick your sex. You cannot do that. But that's what they're focused on, the sexual perversion of the minds of our children. So, at the end of the last legislative session, which adjourned in May, I had heard of ESG. I had not heard of it when this year started. I had not heard of ESG. ESG is an incredible threat, and it's been under the radar for a number of years, and the Democrats have been advancing the ball as fast as they can before it gets brought to the forefront. But people are waking up, and that's why I'm giving this presentation. This is the 4th or 5th time I'm giving this presentation to different areas in the state, drawing attention to it. I've also met with legislators from other states that have introduced, and some states have passed legislation prohibiting ESG initiatives and discrimination against different industries. But it is, more work needs to be done, but this bill, H.F. 4574, is one that I introduced at the end of the session that said the State Board of Investment and any state agency is prohibited from investing in and required to divest from companies boycotting mining, energy production, agriculture production, or commercial lumber production. Yeah. So the Democrats won't see this, didn't see the light of day, but that's okay, because we're going to win the majorities this November, and we're going to come back, and I'm working on refinements and additions and strengthening of the language here in the interim. So when we come back into session in the majority next year, we can begin to pull back some of the control from the executive branch and the SBI and not use our dollars to work against our interests. So with that, questions? Andrew?
So you're going to be off in the Senate, right?
That's right, that's a House file. Yes, I will now have to author the House committee. That's exactly right, the Senate file.
Was there a Senate file issued parallel with that?
There was jackets. It was so close to the end of session, I honestly don't remember if they were introduced, to be honest. I'd have to look it up.
Can you repeat the question so that it comes into the mic?
The question was, given that when I introduced this, it was a House file, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek question, but the question was, will I be introducing it as a Senate author? And the answer is yes, because I'm running for Senate next year. Or I should say this November. Yes, back there.
I'd like to say I'm from Carlton County, on September 14th, we're having a showing at Four Seasons Arena in Carlton of 2,000 mules. We're going to have free hot dogs, and it starts probably about 5 or 6. You can ask me, but you can find out what's right by the Fort Wayne Casino. I didn't want to interrupt you, but
yeah, totally. So there's an event, you said it was September what day?
14th.
September 14th, there's an event.
5 or 6 or something like that. We'll probably start showing up a little bit after that.
Talk to this gentleman if you have more interest, but it sounds like an interesting event. Oh, there's an advertisement over here. Perfect. Perfect. Other questions? Yes.
So some of our local but big energy corporations here, I happen to know, are doing this ESG. So they're promoting it within their, even in their higher rank employees are having their bonuses based on, are you pushing ESG on?
That's right.
So how do you reconcile that our own energy companies want ESG? Like, I don't understand why they would want that.
Because, okay, so the question was, what do we do with energy companies that are pushing ESG? As one example, it's one industry, but every industry, this has infected many industries. And there are many good people that have no idea what they're doing when they say ESG, first of all. They think it's just some warm, fuzzy topic. They don't understand the gravity of what they're doing in terms of eroding our liberty. They haven't connected those dots. right? So assuming that they have the patience and willingness to listen, you could educate them and give them some tips on, if you have the opportunity to have the conversation, to let them know, hey, this is a direct threat. And our company should be making decisions based on risk and return on investment. Should not be making decisions based on how politically correct a particular topic is. Right? Our energy policy should be based on what is going to produce the cleanest, most reliable, and cheapest form of energy. By the way, what is that? Nuclear power, exactly. In the state of Minnesota and across the country, our energy policy, I'm only using energy because you brought it up, energy policy should be guided by clean, cheap, and reliable. Not how many people on the board are transgender. That is not a decision on what I care about as an energy consumer that impacts my energy bill, right? Or the reliability that the power stays on through a thunderstorm or a snowstorm. That's what I care about. Now I can say that as a minority myself, married to a minority. And I'm trying to think here, all of my married siblings are also married to minorities. So my minority siblings are married to minorities, so I can say, I don't care about that decision and its impacts on me as a consumer. What I care about is the risk and the return on investment. Now, if somebody, that's the left, the radical leftists are bullies, as I've already mentioned before. And they try to bully me on the floor. You've heard, and some of you have heard, John Thompson tried to shut me down by calling me a racist. Bring it on. Bring it on. I'm not going to be shut down. You're not going to bully me. How many recall that incident? Did it make the news up here? I see one hand. One hand, okay. I was talking about law enforcement and defunding the police, and I was interrupted on the House floor, and I was called a racist. Okay? Doesn't work. It's not going to work with me. Anyway, to answer, did I answer the question? I know it's kind of a tangent, but there are people, unfortunately, advancing this ESG agenda that they haven't seen the bigger picture as to what they're doing. And that's the reason for the conversation tonight, to continue to get the information out and to communicate with those in the spheres of our influence. Way in the back.
I love the fact that you're bringing it forward and in this way that I haven't heard it before, so thank you for that. I really do believe, though, as Republicans, we also hold our purse strings. So we can also vote with our dollars. And, the woke board of whatever can say what they want, but we can also choose to shop at that store. We have to start thinking with our money where our mouth is and quit buying from these companies. I mean, we can't pick our energy source or stop Minnesota Power or Lake Country Power, but we can also vote with our pocketbooks. And we have to stop sitting there and saying, oh, it may be 35% more expensive to buy American. I'm an American-made manufacturer, and I'm a sailor's daughter. I'm from here. But we have to start saying, I'm not going to buy these products that are made in China. And we have to start buying American-made products. And we start having to push these CEOs and tell them, we're not going to stand for it anymore. And my second thought is, why can't we give the elites a break? Why can't we give Carly Jenner, who has to decide which plane she's taking, her boyfriend or hers, when she's preaching to us what we are going to do? So I want to tell everybody, vote with your pocketbooks. And hopefully ESG won't come to America as much as it is in China. But that's what I want to tell you guys. And just keep buying American. Keep pushing American-made products.
Yeah, totally. For those who couldn't hear and for the microphone, for the camera, the point was, on an individual level, we can make decisions in our lives with our spending habits. And there are companies that are actively pushing the ESG agenda. And if we're aware of that, we absolutely have alternatives. That's the beauty of free market capitalism, right? We have choices. Now, when they collude together, when these lending institutions create a cartel-like manner to discriminate, yeah, then it becomes difficult. And that's part of the additional bill that I'm working on over the interim here, to utilize or harness some of the existing statutes we already have in the areas of fiduciary responsibility, anti-monopoly, anti-collusion. Why not take those existing decades-old definitions and extend them to these areas of ESG to hopefully cut it off at the pass? But no, that's a great point. Other questions? Yes?
I always see on Republican board head or board, you want to say, election integrity, but they don't say nothing more than just integrity. What do you mean by integrity? What avenues of approach should I take care of? That's my main one. And number two is, I'm for a commission of states, I'll be honest with you. And the states has been run over by the federal government. And I see the states not fighting back except for a few. And I'm surprised that things like term limits is not on the billboard for the state of Minnesota. Number two is that federal budget is killing us all. I don't care how you look at it, from businesses to individuals. Now they got 80,000 IRS on for more dollars out of us. You know, it goes from a little bit all the way up. Next thing is control. I look at the last when they tried to take control of the election process, and I said, "You got to be kidding me! Each state had some sort of board or what do you want to call Secretary of State running this stuff. They're taking control, and there's nobody complaining. And I just don't understand. You know, those states are saying, "Hey, stop this stuff." You know, if you look at the Constitution, all right, you look at Article 7 tells us exactly what the federal government is supposed to be doing.
So what's your question for me?
Article 10 of the Constitution spells out, and I'll paraphrase it, is right for the states and the citizens. And
I agree with everything you said, but what's your question for me?
My question is, are you for a commission of states?
Absolutely, I'm a proponent of Article 5. Yep.
I don't mean to be against you or nothing like that, but I just thought...
My answer to your question is yes, I'm a supporter of Article 5.
Don't know everything about it. That's what I'm going to get at. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. No, I appreciate your passion, and you're spot on, and great segue to the second PowerPoint I've got, which is election integrity. So we'll definitely take a deeper dive in that. How are we doing on time, Andrew? Are we...
We're at 4:08, so...
A 7:45. Oh, wow. Ooh, yikes. Okay. So that leaves me out to take my 30-minute presentation and condense it down to 15. Are we doing the bio break?
Keep going.
Keep going. Okay. All right. Keep going. So let's turn the light back down. Election integrity is the next portion of the PowerPoint. So, as Andrew mentioned in the opening introduction, I do cybersecurity for a living. I've been in the industry for over 15 years. And I've also been talking on election integrity around the state. So again, I'm going to go a little bit faster here. So, excuse me for let's see, just being faster, I guess. But I need to start with the premise. Identification versus authentication. So in the field of security, that's what I do. The difference between identification and authentication is making a claim. If I ask you what your name is, you tell me what your name, you answer by telling me your name, you've identified yourself. Okay, but to authenticate yourself, I need you to prove you are who you claim to be. Does that make sense? So identification is making a claim, putting it into a username password context. When you're logging onto your banking website or Facebook or whatever website, when you are identifying yourself by entering in the username. You're making a claim on your identity, right? But now you prove you are who you claim to be by doing what? By entering in the password. That's authentication. Okay, that's very important as we get into this election integrity conversation. Same-day registration. So in the state, there are many states across the country. I shouldn't say many, I don't know how many there are specifically, but there are others in addition to Minnesota that have same-day registration. What does that mean? It means the day of the election day, you can come in and you're not pre-registered and you register right there on the spot. But in those other states that allow for same-day registration, they have provisional balloting. Provisional balloting is, okay, you've just registered right now, we're going to take your ballot, put it in this envelope, and put it into a different pile than the rest of the ballots, because we do not want to commingle them until we're going to allow for a week to authenticate your eligibility to vote. Does that make sense? Yes. So if we're in those other states where same-day registration exists, they also have provisional ballots to not commingle the ballot immediately, but to segregate it until authentication and validation of eligibility can occur. And after validation has occurred, then the ballot is commingled with the rest. Okay? But in the state of Minnesota, it's my understanding we are the only state that has both same-day registration and no provisional ballots.
Right.
So in those states that don't have provisional ballots, like Minnesota, we don't have provisional ballots, in those states, they don't have same day. You have to register in advance of the election to allow for that validation process to occur, to ensure or validate your eligibility. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But in Minnesota, we have both same day and no provisional ballots. So somebody comes in, unauthenticated, they cast an invalid ballot, it's commingled with the rest, and if their eligibility is deemed to be ineligible, their ballot cannot be separated. And what does that do to all legally cast ballots? It dilutes them, right?
Yeah.
Huge problem. I just mentioned provisional ballots, consent decree. So trying to tell this story really fast. April of 2020, COVID was a thing, and it was in advance of the 2020 election. Secretary of State Steve Simon came to the legislature, if I can speed up here. He came to the state legislature and he proposed a series of changes. You can see him here sitting in front of the committee, April 8th, 2020. He came to the legislature and proposed a series of changes. Why was he in front of the legislature seeking to change election law? Because per the United States Constitution, authority is granted to the various state legislatures to write election law for their state. In Minnesota, the state legislature in the past has written Minnesota's election law. It exists, it's on the books. The chief elections officer in the state, Secretary of State Simon, came to the legislature recognizing that the legislative branch is tasked with changing election law, proposed a series of changes. Now, we received those changes as a legislative branch, we considered them, and what did we end up doing with them? Does anybody know? In our sole authority, we chose not to do anything with his series of proposals, such as extending the deadline to count ballots, such as eliminating the witness signature, such as allowing for mail-in ballots across the board, etc., right? Okay, so we received his proposals. The reason he was there is because he recognized that the legislature makes election law. We considered them, and per our authority, we chose not to change election law. Well, because the Democrats, radical leftists, progressives, never take no for an answer, they then conjured up a different scheme because the legal, legitimate route didn't work for them. So, Democracy Docket, which is a left-wing radical group with direct ties to the Democrat National Committee, as a plaintiff, hired Mark Elias, a radical left-wing progressive lawyer, who this group probably is aware of, or heard of the name Mark Elias, right? Yes. The Franken-Coleman election, 2008. Mark Elias. So this radical left-wing progressive group, Democracy Docket, hired Mark Elias, radical left-wing shyster lawyer, and they then sued radical left-wing progressive Secretary of State Simon, and they sought a series of changes due to COVID. Never let a crisis go to waste. And what do you think their series of proposals or demands were in this lawsuit? They happen to be the same things that Secretary of State Simon, in that previous slide, was proposing. Well, rather than defend Minnesota election law, as is his constitutional responsibility, he decided to acquiesce and give in to their demands. Okay, and they formalized that giving in the form of a consent decree. And that consent decree then was signed off and agreed to by Judge Sarah Grueling, herself appointed by Governor Mark Dayton. Okay, Governor Mark Dayton, radical left-wing progressive Democrat, appointed her, and herself was a former staffer in Amy Klobuchar's campaign. Herself a radical left-wing progressive senator. Okay, so here you have this left-wing plaintiff represented by a radical lawyer suing a radical left-wing Democrat Secretary of State in front of a radical left-wing judge appointed by a radical left-wing governor. There is no representation for our value set, right? Nobody's at the table there defending Minnesota election law. They formalized it in the consent decree. And in this consent decree, you can see among the provisions in here, it says, shall not enforce the witness requirement. You see that? This is the very consent decree. Shall not enforce the election day receipt deadline. Ballots received by 8 p.m. So it shall not enforce ballots received by 8 p.m. on election day. Per Minnesota law, ballots must be received by 8 p.m. election day, regardless of how they're cast. If they're mail-in, in-person, overseas, military, it doesn't matter. Whatever the form, must be received 8 p.m. election day. So among the provisions that they agreed to are those. Consent decree continued. Where a ballot does not bear a postmarked date, the election official reviewing the ballot should presume that it was mailed on or before election day, unless a preponderance of the evidence demonstrates that it was mailed after election day. So if a postmark was missing, it was in this consent decree. It was the order is to presume it was mailed on or before election day. Yeah. Is that crazy?
Yeah.
Does that sound like fraud to you?
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
The election was real.
Okay, so I was one of two plaintiffs. I had a co-plaintiff, and we sued Secretary of State Simon based on that consent decree. How many heard about this? Yep. How many in the corporate media, or listen to corporate media? I see a few hands. The vast majority have never heard of this. I better put in one more fisherman's friend here. So I was on the slate of electors for President Trump. So myself and my co-plaintiff, James Carson, who's a Republican activist in CD4, we sued Secretary of State Simon. We lost in federal district court. We appealed to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we won. And this is that opinion right here. This follows from our determination that the Secretary's actions in altering the deadline for mail-in ballots likely violates the Electors Clause of Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution. The Constitution leaves it to the legislature exclusively. Okay, this is their ruling. Simply put, the Secretary has no power to override the Minnesota legislature. In fact, a legislature's power in this area is such that it cannot be taken from them or modified even through their state constitutions. Why? Because the federal constitution is the one where the authority comes from to the state legislatures. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So they can't even modify it through modifying their own state constitutions. The rule of law as established by the United States Constitution and the Minnesota legislature dictates that these rules must be followed, notwithstanding the Secretary's instructions to the contrary. There is no pandemic exception to the Constitution. I love that line. Yeah. Continuing on, nothing in this statute authorizes the Secretary to override the legislature's ballot deadlines due to public health concerns. And here's the last paragraph. And this is many pages, so I'm just taking some of the snippets here, some of the highlights. The Secretary's instructions to count mail-in ballots received up to 7 days after Election Day stand in direct contradiction to Minnesota election law governing presidential elections, and the electors have strongly shown, that's myself and James Carson, the electors have strongly shown likelihood of success on the merits, since the Secretary's actions are likely to be declared invalid under the Elections Clause of Article 2 of the United States Constitution. Okay? Good ruling. Yeah. The 8th Circuit Court of Appeals eviscerated Secretary of State Simon. How many heard of this ruling? Did the corporate media, did you hear in the corporate media the several hands that went up? No. Corporate media has no interest because this goes against their talking points, against their narrative. So as I've been reading these headlines, so when President Trump won the 2016 election, the corporate media's narrative over and over and over again was that the election wasn't fair, Russian interference, blah, 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 right? Now when President Biden wins the, quote, wins the 2020 election, every single headline has to include in the body lines such as it was the most secure, right? The validity of the process, etc. And so, just speaking along here, another example: no evidence that Simon had done anything illegal. Courts have repeatedly upheld the rule change. By the way, this screenshot I took here was from a Star Tribune article. August 8th. How many days ago was August 8th, 2022? Right? Just a handful of days ago.
One day.
And yet the Star Tribune is still repeating the false narrative that no evidence that Simon has done anything illegal. The 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, courts have repeatedly upheld the rules change. The rule changes that they're referring to right here are the consent decree. I just read you the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals ruling. Did it sound like they upheld Secretary of State Simon's rules change? No. So then why is the Star Tribune printing something that says courts have repeatedly upheld?
Because
they're lying.
Because it's the Red Star.
They're saying Simon had not done, no evidence that he's done anything illegal. But you saw in the 8th Circuit, he unconstitutionally took actions that violated Minnesota election law. The Star Tribune is one example of corporate media lying. And they repeat the lie over and over and over again, with help of their friends in Hollywood and government schools. And people are not getting the truth.
Amen.
Here's another Star Tribune. Despite no evidence of widespread voter fraud. I'm sorry, how much fraud is acceptable?
None.
No fraud is acceptable. It's just complete garbage what they're saying. Voting systems and processes, no evidence of widespread fraud or manipulation. So, I apologize, Andrew, for going long here on the previous one. Condensing the speech, let me see, I think that's the last slide. Okay, so I'll get into the articles of impeachment after this. My point of starting the conversation with identification and birth authentication is we in the state of Minnesota and in other states, but focusing on the state of Minnesota, we need to focus on the front end. If we can put our efforts on the front end, ensuring authentication before ballots are cast with photo identification, that is going to fix 80% plus of the problem. 20% of the energy, 80% of the problem. If we can ensure up front, and we can do that. And so when you saw there the underline, the system, the process is broken. We cannot allow same-day registration and no provisional ballots to continue in the state of Minnesota. Now, as we've been seeing since the 2020 election, I'm a technologist. I do cybersecurity for a living. I'm in the digital space. We've had a lot of conversation on voting machines, Dominion, et cetera, What I'm trying to do is not say that that's invalid. I'm saying we need to focus those concerns over here, and we need to have focus on that, and that should be part of the conversation to ensure that systems can't be compromised, right? But our focus needs to be here on the front end. If we spend our energy over here, and we don't focus over here on the voter identification and the authentication that needs to happen on the front end, this is where most of the fraud is occurring. Does that make sense? Because when you eliminate witness signatures and you allow same-day registration and vouching, do you know what vouching means?
Yeah.
You can just vouch for somebody else. Okay, you can bring in a utility bill. You know, I can manufacture a CenterPoint Energy or Excel Energy utility bill in 60 seconds on the internet. I can manufacture that. Now, part of the process is, so you saw there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. So Senator Mary Kiffmeyer is my senator, and we were at a joint town hall together, and she's the former Secretary of State, and it's based on an answer from a question a couple years ago from one of our constituents at this town hall. Part of the process is when a person comes in and does same-day registration, it kicks off a card. So after the election, mailers are sent out to the name and to the address that was provided. Mary Kiffmeyer, Senator Kiffmeyer said tens of thousands of those come back non-deliverable, address doesn't exist, etc., etc.
Right.
That is evidence of widespread voter fraud. Okay? So again, our attention needs to be up here. I've heard from many across Minnesota that said, Eric, why should we even vote? Our vote doesn't count. The machines are compromised, etc., etc. I bring up the consent decree and the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals because do not be demoralized. The same rules of engagement in 2016 that allowed Trump to almost win Minnesota were not the same rules of engagement in 2020. But now, as a result of this successful lawsuit striking down that consent decree, we've reverted in 2022, we reverted back to the same rules of engagement of 2016. Does that make sense? Yep. Do not be demoralized. We have a great opportunity because people are angry over gas, groceries, and crime. So lastly, and I don't have time to get into a deeper level of this, but I have chief authored articles of impeachment because of his usurping of Minnesota election law. I filed House Resolution 5 against Secretary of State Simon. The Democrat majority never allowed this to see the light of day. And then the next one, I firmly believe that the legislative branch needs to begin exercising our constitutional responsibility of a check over the judicial branch and begin to impeach judges that have run well outside of the So I've also chief authored articles of impeachment against Judge Sarah Grueling. That's House Resolution 3. So, with that ends election integrity. Again, I had to speed through that one. So with that, Andrew, you tell me how much time we have. If we have questions, it's up to you.
Well, why don't we take some questions now?
Okay, questions?
We have until 8:30 or however long.
Yes, sir.
Georgia laws, before it was changed, they made more of a population going to the voting machines or voting at the time. Is there a way to follow suit what Georgia did? You don't, you have to be pre-registered, you got to have your voting absentee ballot put in 10 days beforehand, and everything else. It cuts down the voting business of possibly dropping ballots in the ballot boxes.
So the question is, can Minnesota election law be changed? Absolutely. It has to pass the House, it has to pass the Senate, it has to be signed into law by the executive branch. So right now the legislature's not in session, so nothing can change right now before the 2022 election. But that's one of the things we're looking to do. It is a top priority of myself and many other legislators. I saw Senator Coran here. He's still here. I know he's in the Senate. He's on the election. Is it the elections committee? Is that what you call it? It's definitely a top priority to get Minnesota's election system cleaned up, which includes photo ID and provisional ballots if we're still going to have same-day registration.
Okay.
Yes.
You want to make elections so trustworthy, even Democrats believe the results.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Sir.
What's state law about boxes in Minnesota?
What state law allows? Now, I don't sit on the elections committee, so I don't know. In the House, I sit on the Public Safety Committee, the Commerce Committee, and the Capital Investment Committee. So that question, the question was, what law allows for drop boxes?
Like, if it was state law.
Oh, if it was state law, that I don't know for sure.
Wisconsin was just overturned. Not that problem.
So I am not in favor of drop boxes. I am in favor of getting rid of voting season, and I do not agree with no excuse absentee voting. I believe in election day. Yeah. So I saw one more hand back here. Two hands back there. Three hands. Okay, ma'am.
I'm still concerned about Dominion voting machines.
So one of the things on the opening slide, decentralized power is a way to preserve or protect liberty, right? So under the state of Minnesota, our election law has delegated that responsibility to the various counties. So each of the 87 counties can themselves decide what vendor of machine they want to use. It's my understanding, I could be wrong, but it's my understanding right now in the state of Minnesota, there are 3 counties that use those machines.
Right.
And so those 3 counties, it is up to the county commissioners. I am not in favor of usurping local control and trying to make that decision at the state level, right? I wouldn't want that. But if there's a concern, go to your county commissioners and have them switch those vendors out. Yes, go ahead.
I think St. Louis County was using Dominion. And this year, and we had new machines in the primary. And this was the first time there were 2 numbers of results on that machine. There were numbers on the machine before any voter that came in that day had inserted a ballot. And it said there were some restricted counts already in the machine.
I would county commissioners, the battle is at the county commissioner. Ma'am, did you want to speak to this point? I saw 2 other hands, or were you wanting to speak to her point?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Caroline worked with me on election, and what they explained to us is there's been a new update done to our election machines, and there's now a count of every ballot that has ever gone through that machine. And I understand they may want that count, but I wish they would hide it so that only the day of election, that's the count that we're concerned with. But having that other one there for everybody to see is a little confusing.
You mean from previous elections?
If they did some test ballots, after the updates, every ballot that goes through the machine gets a count.
I know we're running out of time here, but I saw 2 more hands. Yes.
These votes, they may be illegal, some of them count. I think it was like 4 years ago, there was a lady, probably a Democrat, she was bringing people up from the halfway house. They were felons, and we called a couple of them. But we find out the end result, their votes counted. And they went to court, got fined $50, and everybody showed up.
Unfortunately, and I've heard from other states, I recently went to an election integrity conference, and the legislators from other states, senior living communities and communities for disabled people are ripe for fraud by the staff there.
That's right.
And they're being abused. These good elderly and or disabled people are being abused by the staff committing election fraud.
One guy from our Bayfield Youth said that he was questioned more than 3 different times.
100%. I saw one more hand kind of in the, yes, ma'am. First and foremost, do not get demoralized. I've heard, and I'm emphasizing it because I've heard over and over from across the state, people say, I'm not even going to vote. If we don't vote, we're absolutely not going to win, first. And so communicate that within your circles. Second, because government, so for those of us who, so I'm a Bible-believing Christian. Yeah, thank you. And as such, I have a faith and I make decisions in my life for my faith. I sacrifice financially, I give tithes. I give of my time. I make other decisions within my life according to my faith, right? Well, the leftists, they also have a faith. Their faith is big government. Okay? And just as those of us make decisions according to our faith, they make similar decisions. They sacrifice of their time, they sacrifice of their money, etc., etc. And my point is, in the off years, what an off year is the non-election year. So in the non-election year and in the election year, they're acting according to their faith, sacrificing their careers, and canvassing neighborhoods for voter identification, door knocking, phone calling, etc. Engage in those activities. Well, those of us on this side, we're very busy raising our children, disciplining our children, trying to pursue happiness as we define it, right? We just want to be left alone. But unfortunately, the other side, so we're at a disadvantage because of our worldview is a little bit different. But the second thing I would say is we need people to do what they're doing: canvassing, voter identification, identifying who's moving into those new homes, that new construction, so we can understand where they fall and then work on, again, we have political season in this state, and so political season, not how you voted, but that you voted is public information. So I know that you have voted. So in the 46 days leading up to the election, when you have voted, by the next day, the fact that you have voted is public information. So what the Democrats are doing is they do voter identification in these neighborhoods. They know who their supporters are. On a daily basis in those 46 days leading up to election day, they are watching, they're comparing the list of their known supporters with who has voted, and if somebody hasn't yet voted and they're a known supporter, what do you think they're doing? They're hounding them to get out and vote. Okay? We're way behind in this. So that's why voting season is working to our disadvantage rather than voting day. I know I'm way out of time at this point, so...
Can I just...
No? Yeah, you have okay, go ahead.
I recently heard that the proportion of Democrats who are election judges is about 3 times larger than Republicans or conservatives. So how many of you have given up the hope of being an election judge because of the crookedness, and now you are no longer one of the few Republicans, and so it's time to get off your duff, stop complaining, and get there and be an election judge, because this is another crucial election, and you can take notes and be the eyes of what's been happening. You can have a notepad and say, I've seen these violations as an election judge, and I've taken notes and I've reported that stuff. But if you're not there being an election judge, you got no voice.
Those who show up are those who have influence in every context. Right. Just one more to emphasize there. In these days leading up to the election, last Saturday and this coming up Saturday and every Saturday, I'm just saying Saturdays as one example, I have already got standing appointments to be out there door knocking. I'm going to be out there door knocking in those districts to get some of our candidates across the line so we can take the majority. I saw a hand over here, but I also want to pass the microphone to Senator Karen. Yes?
Quick question. Senator Kiffmeyer, what was the number of people that had help, that sent the cards out, and they went to undeliverable?
I don't know. I don't have a specific number.
No, it was on the PowerPoint.
Oh no, so when we were doing a joint town hall, she said tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands?
Yep. So it's a lot. Senator Karen, do you want to say a few words?
We want to, if you got time, we could double team. There's a couple things that could add to.
Why don't you come over?
Go ahead. Absolutely.
I think. Hi everybody. Hi everybody. I'm State Senator Mark Curran, and Eric did a great job today, and we're going to. It's going to be a wonderful addition to the Senate. Again, I might have to wear sunglasses as we go into the wonderful chambers, but Eric's done a great job, and he takes our ribbing well. He should. A House member always has to until we get them broken in the Senate. But I think one of the questions was about the voting equipment. So Dominion machines were in 6 different counties in Minnesota, okay? But I know there's a lot of people talking about there. There's a certain gentleman running around the state, running around the nation that shows, and he's got proof. I can tell you, as a member of the election committee and the vice chair for 4 years, I made 5 requests to that entity. Sit down, talk with us. They could sit down. Eric attended the symposium in South Dakota and was shown no information, right? No verifiable information that we could act upon. And the same thing, Senator Kiffmeyer, I know, made 3 requests. Former Secretary of State, right? She chaired the elections committee and state government, and they refused to respond to our request. And I can tell you, if there's information that they have that they can verify proof, sure as heck, sure we're going to take action on it. They don't. And so what you end up with, and there's a variety of entities, actually many of them, I call them the election profiteers, right? They fuel on, they take one issue, and boy, they can ramp you up, and they're more detrimental to our entire election process and our entire political process than any out there. Under the statement that they share our values. Most of the people that attack us are the ones that claim to share our values, share the same values. And so with that, I don't believe that that entity, if they had information that they couldn't trust one of us in the state legislature to be able to look at that information and to validate and to be able to take action, sure as heck we would. We certainly would. The other pieces to it is that I want to add is that on the election integrity piece, so the provisional ballot aspect of it in those mailed-in postcards or those return postcards. When you look at that scenario, that means that those postcards, because we do 3 checks on the same-day voter registration. Same-day voter registration is anything 21 days and up to election day. 3 checks out of the 10 before you get to cast your ballot. So they're casting the ballot with those 3. That postcard comes out later. Their job is to validate, to do the other 7 integrity checks that you're an eligible voter to cast that ballot. Well, they know, they don't care. Magic's already, the ballot's in the box, right? That's not coming out. If they don't validate those, and this ties into another lawsuit that started from the formation of 2008 that the Minnesota Voter Alliance has been trying to get to. The data associated with our state voter registration system. So we can get the basic information Eric described, we can get a lot of stuff on a daily basis. But what they won't give us is what's the status of that voter? So in a provisional ballot environment, so when they don't get validated, do they list them as a challenged voter? We don't know. If they're listed as challenged, that means they can't do same-day voter registration in the next election cycle. Okay, but what if they listed them as inactive? Means that same person that was never validated could vote in every single election. So that, to me, is the #1 hole. Voter ID is good, but we need both. But those are the issues that win. So, believe it or not, something else started in 2008 when Mark Elias came onto the stage, is that very data which would prove us wrong. If we don't believe the election integrity or that we can trust it, they could prove us wrong in 12 minutes. Provide that data which would allow us to validate the integrity of every single election. They refuse to do it. That data we speak of was available publicly for decades, all the way up until 2008.
Wow.
But it's not a coincidence that just happens to be 2008 with the arrival of Mark Eliason and Mark Ritchie and the continuance of Secretary Simon initiating those things. So that's how important the elections are and how important it is that everybody gets out. Everybody knows somebody who hasn't voted. There's still over 1 million people that haven't registered to vote. They share our values. Get out there, drag them out there, drag them however you can. But remember, our standards are a little bit higher than the other side. We do require a pulse. So make sure they're still breathing when they get there. So those are some of the things that they're real and they're legit, and everybody has cause. But that same concern is shared by practically 70% of America, that they want to be able to trust the election results. Anything we talk about is not disenfranchisement. In fact, the very thing we're talking about today is disenfranchisement. If we didn't have the 1 seat in the Senate majority for the last 6 years, the Secretary Simon proposals were literally the destruction of every integrity check in the entire system. That would have been passed. That would have been passed. They would have done that, not 2017 or 18, because we had the House then, which sure as heck would have been the first thing they did in that next legislative session as a majority in the House. And so 1 seat does matter. Eric, they missed taking the majority, your vote matters. 4 seats, less than 650 votes. It would have mattered. Where would we be if we didn't have that 1 vote and that 1 Senate seat? We would have had all of those things. Look up whatever the federal bill, whatever you see at the federal level, we have that in spades here in Minnesota. They've attempted to do everything. We mirror Congress in every way in the crazies that are out there. Eric's had more time to spend with them, but you will see a wholesale change in the Minnesota Senate this election cycle. So 3 election cycles, there's very few people that are going to be occupying the other side of the aisle, I think, that can spell Constitution and have any desire to adhere to it. 4 maybe, 4. So that's who we're up against every day in every aspect. So, and then last thing on election integrity. So if you followed the ethics complaint that we filed in the Minnesota Senate, I led that complaint. Senator Omar Fateh, his campaign office, which is an illegal campaign office, located in a private business entity, big fine coming out of that, and we're going to hope, and it has a jail term that could possibly go with it as well. But everything you talked about, or everything we've seen in kind of ballot harvesting, in this case it was agent delivery methods where you have to have a real close relationship with somebody. That was one of those headquartered offices. So I'd love to see the 2,000 meals data for that particular neighborhood. You would see exactly what that movie shows. They were headquartered right there. Senator Omar Fateh has violated many, many state laws, and what you'll see is that entire scenario is everything we're talking about. You can go from feeding our future, the theft in those funds, feeding that particular community, who then donate to their favorite candidate at the maximum, and they get the votes back, and they get the dollars back into their political machine. And at least 40%, if not 50% of those dollars are your dollars. So when you hear about talking about funding nonprofit enterprises in St. Paul, Minneapolis, billions of dollars goes into those entities. That's how those dollars come back into that life cycle, into Democrat policies. If you look at, I don't know if you had time, Eric, to look at Senator Omar Fateh raised $110,000 and almost does it every election cycle with no PAC money, only individual contributions. Have you been able to do that with only individual contributions? Are 20% of your contributors who sent you the $1,000 maximum that you can contribute is unemployed? I didn't think so. In his, they are. And so what we're looking at is we need to look at that campaign finance. We've got a couple reports going in. But it's the epitome of exactly what they do. They don't care what the law is. It's how important the Secretary of State is, the Attorney General. The other part the emphasis on who negotiated that consent decree, which destroyed election law and violated our state constitution. He was aided by Attorney General Keith Ellison. Both of them had the constitutional responsibility to support our Constitution. And they yielded and had their friends in the nonprofit industry. I think many of them claim to be nonpartisan too, just that they're very partisan. Those are the ones who then use the court system to subvert the state legislature, and it's disgusting. But we can't give up. We know we can take it back. There's energy out there, and younger energy than we've ever seen in this state party, and we're out there and we're going to take it back. So with that, Eric, we'll take more questions.
Are there more questions? Andrew, yes.
What can we do individually to support the fight against ESG?
So on the ESG, so we did in two topics. Individually, we need to continue to communicate and get the information out. Right now, they're making progress, as we heard great with the question with the energy employer or provider. The question is, what can we do as individually to help combat ESG? I heard the answer to that question from the audience here. One of them is to communicate within our spheres to get the information out. Second is to make decisions within ourselves and our lives. Right? Personally, just one minor example, and I know it's not going to bankrupt them, it's not going to change them at all, but it's over time, by me canceling, or I shifted my cellular provider from AT&T over to Pure Talk. Okay, that's Pure Talk is another company, but the answer is we need to get the information out, and we need to make decisions with our money against or away from these ESG and asset managers that are making ESG decisions.
So I'm going to take a little different approach to it. So ESG is just what? Formulation of what we've seen across the board in our school systems and our government entities for sure. And what is it? They're now looking for a kinder, gentler form of oppression through government-forced racism. That's all this is, and taking it to really taking it to the next level. ESG, by the way, its foundation is in the Paris Climate Accord. I wonder why all the globalists they didn't like Donald Trump for bringing us out of that. But I would argue, look at it a little differently. Every day in your life, how often or how many times did you willingly provide the information that's allowed to now government-sponsored discriminatory practices against you and every one of your beliefs? Do any of you have ethnicity? Wait, you all have ethnicity, right? Any of you ever seen that on one of these special ethnicity lists on any survey that you've ever taken or government-sponsored or a medical provider? Anybody seen yours listed? Me either. And so what we've done is we continue to comply to give them that information on a daily basis under the guise that was some useful information to it. Well, it's been weaponized. One, I think they identify, capture, and contain a whole population for dependency. The industries that live around us, I call them the non-profiteers, right? It's an entire industry living on dependency. That's their fuel. But we have to stop it. At the end of the day, if we continue to comply with everything they ask for in that environment, they can continually and overtly discriminate against you, and you're going to go willingly. We have to stop it. From this day forward, check all the above. Right? We've got kids checking in schools now that they have multiple ethnicities, and they're getting in before white kids are getting in, just because they've checked them. They have no way to validate it, but you've complied, because we're rule followers, right? We follow the rule, we got morals, values, and ethics, and we follow the law. I think you can do that and still compete. Don't ever give them that information. Don't check other. You're just going to be lumped in with all of us Mountain Challenge people. Don't do it, because that is one of the foundations, the collection of that data. And if you've seen anything on the state government, read the Alpha News article. Did you see that one come out? About state government and their 2-year transformation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the other horrible 3-letter acronym, meaning we get to officially discriminate against you in every single hiring practices in every state government job. And what ESG does is takes that practice and just moves it out into the private world. Never check those boxes again. Or never check the none or other. Check all the above, or at least a few of the above. Be just as special as the next person. At the end of the day, we need to dilute it so much that they have to judge you on the character of you, and not the personality, or not your personality. That'll be next. But certainly not your skin tone or your melanin content, because it's one of the most discriminatory things we can do to a human. But to me, it's in every facet of what we're doing. So I like to take the other harsh look. We got to stop playing their games. We got to start playing by their rules, and we can fight back and still maintain our morals, values, and operate within the law.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everybody, for the opportunity. It's been a true honor to join you this evening, and I've got a 2.5-hour drive back, my wife and I. Oh, if you wouldn't mind, one shameless plug. So I am running for Senate, if you just give me 60 seconds.
Absolutely.
I am running for Senate. I see Jeff here, he's running for House. Mark is running for Senate, obviously. Elections are expensive. So I know I'm on other people's territory right now. So after you've contributed to your local candidates, after you've done that, I have some envelopes back there if you're willing to help me out. If you haven't yet exercised the PCR contribution, political contribution refund, for those who don't know what that is, it's a program that on an annual basis you can make a $50 contribution per person. So every married couple can contribute $100. The candidate gives you a receipt, you send that into the state, and they send you your money back. You're up to $100 or $50 per person. The other side is raising millions of dollars on this. It's a program that those of us Republicans, many have not even heard of and don't use. But you can do it once per year. So after you've made contributions to your local candidates, please consider a contribution because, again, we have to keep the majority in Minnesota for the sake of our children.
Yeah.